Ah, well, the reason that I'm here to share with you this morning actually was just, I think Chip asked me maybe about a week ago. He just sent me an email, a text, or something, and said, "Mark, would you be willing to share at next week's NCS meeting?" And I was busy, so I said, "Well, hey, I'll get back to you on Monday." And so Sunday morning, though, and probably like many of you, I've been watching for the last number of weeks, the protests, and as they continue to happen day after day, and days turn into several weeks, and continues to turn into almost 3 weeks now. Um, I've been watching that. I've, you know, it's just been in front of me all the time. So anyway, on Sunday morning, though, probably like most of you, um, our church has to do, a Zoom kind of or a live feed kind of Sunday morning experience. And so Rob and I are sitting in the living room, and right before the sermon, our young pastor prayed, and it was just such a beautiful prayer. But at some point, he used the word protests. And brothers, I'm telling you, I was stunned. It was one of these moments where here it just is in kind of a more routine setting, but in this prayer, and I hear him use the word protest. In my heart, I hear the Lord say, "Mark, I am the original ongoing protester." And I just thought, where did that come from? And I hit the pause button on the prayer, on the service, and I just looked at my wife. I said, "Honey," I said, "I feel like the Lord just spoke to my heart and just said, I am the original protester. I am the continual ongoing protester for injustice." And I'm like, I don't know what he's after, but so I tried to pay attention to the sermon. I couldn't do it. Throughout the day, I kept getting time alone to just go, "Lord, what are you saying to me? Um, Help me understand." So Monday morning in my alone time, um, there is a specific piece of paper I'll show you a little bit later, but I just sat with the Lord looking at all these verses about the Lord caring about what actually Tim Keller called the quartet of the vulnerable. Um, and I was just sitting there thinking about it and going, "Lord, help me understand what you're saying." And I was in process. And so finally I called back, and he said, "So Mark, what do you think? Can you do it?" And I said, "Well, what were you thinking?" And he brought up a couple of thoughts, and I said, "Well, let me tell you what happened to me yesterday." And so I told him about what I felt the Lord said in my heart, and how I was spent the rest of Sunday and a portion of Monday still processing that. And he said, "Well, that sounds good." And so I said, "All right, so I'll do it." And then he asked me later for a title. And the title is not flashy. It's really just the key points and the things that God has said to me over the years, and especially this week. And on Wednesday morning, I was trying to put my thoughts down in writing because they were just all over the place. And in the process, um, Robin came up and I said, "Honey, can you just listen to this? Because I'm just trying to get my thoughts together for these guys." And I started sobbing out of control. I was like, "God, oh, it's coming back again." I just said, "Lord, what are you doing in my soul? What am I missing? What is it you want to have happen in me?" And I suppose I would be so bold as to say, in the hearts of white Christians, of which most of us on this meeting this morning are white Christians. And so anyway, finally, I just said, "Well, here's the key points, and we'll just call it the title." And so this morning, what I want to do is I just want to share with you some experiences and where those words and that title came from. And in my own journey about this stuff with Jesus. Whew. So Lord, help me in Jesus' name. So I was born in Seattle. I grew up though 7 years in Southern California from 4 years old to 11 years old. And part of that time, my best friend was a Mexican. And I mean, he really was my best friend. We played all the time together. His parents could barely speak English. But Danny and we were just close buds. And I never saw him as Mexican. And that he had brown skin, right? He was just my best friend. We moved to Wheaton, suburb of Chicago. And within a short amount of time, the house that we lived in was literally next to the railroad tracks. The railroad tracks went right behind our house. And literally on the other side of the tracks, the guy who became my best friend then, a guy named David Radford, was a black guy. David's mom was a single mom. I found out later that David was the product of rape, and she chose to keep him. And she also had her mom and her uncle living in this pretty broken down house. But David was my best friend. And when we were in 6th grade, I used to hang out up in his bedroom, and he just got engrossed in this cool new band. And I grew up in my household. I grew up in a Christian household, and in my household, there was, I mean, genuinely no racism that I understood. We were born and raised to love everybody. And so David and I, though, we didn't have much music in our home. My parents grew up Pentecostal. There was just a lot of real legalism, and I think some of it was even about listening to the radio or whatever. And so I'm up in David's room, and he tells me, "Mark, you got to listen to this really cool new band, Jackson 5." And the two of us would sit there, and Michael Jackson was our age. He was born like 6 months after me in 1958. He was born, I think it was August. I'm born February of 58. And we'd sing the Jackson 5, and he would be playing the bass strings on his guitar. And in his adult life, he became a professional studio bass player. And but for 3 years, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, David was my best friend. And again, I didn't see the color of his skin. He was just my friend. And I mean, I fell in love with rhythm and music. And my senior year in high school, I was voted the best dancer in the class. It was only because I just loved rhythm, and I was an idiot and I didn't care, you know. I would just be a wild man. Well, anyway, so this is kind of how I grew up. That two of my best friends as a young kid were black and brown. And within the church, anytime there was anybody of color, you just loved them. You just accepted them. I mean, I heard all my life, no Jew, no Gentile, right? That we were one family, one people. Well, then I had this really interesting experience when in 1993, I went to Africa for 3 weeks to do some ministry. Landed in South Africa, and eventually we went to Zambia for a whole week. Zambia, very, very poor. Zambia also had been a British colony, so it was actually one of the more fun places to speak because you didn't have to do it through a translator. Well, I'd been a runner all my life, and so even there, I would get up early in the morning and go out and run. But I remember one day that probably 95% of the people had to walk, and I went out into the main street that day running, and suddenly I was just engulfed in a sea of people. For the first time in my life, I looked and they were all black. I realized I was the only white person in a sea of black. And I'm telling you, I was shocked at the sudden fear that rose up in my heart, where I thought, this is a former British colony. These people are just going to see that I'm white. And what if somebody doesn't even care to know that Mark Fee and who I am and what I'm doing? They would just see me as white. And what if they would do to me what had been done to them? I was overwhelmed with fear, shocked by what I experienced. And I remember then, this is back in 93, of coming home, and for the first time, the Lord's trying to get my attention. This thing, I'm not a racist. You know, in my heart, I believe I'm not a racist, but it was the first time that he said, but Mark, you are ignorant. Now, he didn't use that phrase with me, but it was really, really true. I had no idea. So he gave me a chance to like reverse roles. He gave me a chance to be the one white guy in a sea of black, where in our country so often a black person is in a sea of white, and gave me a chance to understand what that might feel like, to be judged simply by the color of your skin, to be treated by the color of your skin. Well, fast forward, around the year, around 99, 2000, we had a couple come into our church. He was black, she was white. And eventually he came on my staff. And we were hanging out one day. And I don't remember why or how, but I said to him, I said, Chuck, I said, dude, man, I don't see you as black. I see you as my brother. And what happened next just stunned me, is that he just, this anger appeared on his face, and he just looked at me and he said, Mark, that is such an ignorant and foolish thing to say. And I just kind of went, whoa, dude, what the heck? I said, I thought you would appreciate hearing that, you know, that you're my brother. I don't see the color of your skin. I don't treat you according to the color of your skin, that there's no Jew, there's no Gentile. But he said, Mark, if you don't understand that the whole world treats me according to the color of my skin, and you don't understand that when you and I walk out of this building today, and we walk out into the culture inside this building, in our relationship, you and I, yes, we are brothers, and we respect and love and treat one another the same. But he said, the minute I walk out that door into American culture, he says, I am seen first as a big black man. He said, Mark, just come with me to a store. Come with me, especially to a convenience store, and watch how they treat you different than they treat me. Because he says their first thought is going to be that I'm going to rob them or I'm going to steal. That's what they think first. That's what they see first. You never have to deal with that. You never have to think that. You never have to feel that. You have no idea how privileged you are. And I was like, oh my gosh, dude. Maybe I thought I wasn't racist, but boy, I was unbelievably ignorant. My experience in Zambia, now my experience with Chuck, you know what was amazing is that it led to us doing this sermon series out of Ephesians chapter 2, when Paul wrote that in Jesus, the dividing wall of hostility had been torn down. And we ended up doing a whole series of trying to get into one another's shoes, where the difference in gender, to be male or female, the difference to be white or a person of color, to be a white collar versus a blue collar, someone who was educated or uneducated, someone who was attractive versus someone who was fat, someone who lived in this part of town who was poor or wealthy. It was one of the most, again, eye-opening moments, and opened up the ignorance that I thought everybody lived their lives like I did. I was stunned as their pastor to find out how hard it was for so many people in my own church to just live life that the minute we walked out the door, when we were gathered together in church, I just saw them as like me. I just saw them as my brothers and my sisters, but I didn't see their weight. I didn't see their color. I didn't see their gender. I didn't see any of it. I was unbelievably ignorant. And it absolutely broke my heart because I was stunned at the fact that I caught that just by virtue of the circumstances of my life, I was off the charts privileged. I was off the charts treated in a rather special way compared to so many other, even in my own congregation. I'll tell you, if you ever get a chance to do something like that, it was so profound what it did to draw us together as a church, to for the first time really see the person to the left and to the right and to get in their shoes and to care. Well, that was again somewhere around 2001, 2, or 3, somewhere in there. And one more time, the Lord's trying to help me to realize just how ignorant, how blind of what I'm not understanding, of what I'm not seeing. And then most importantly, what am I going to do about it? Well, it was also right around that same time. My son, Nathan, I have 5 kids. Nathan's my 4th. He'll turn 30 in November. When Nathan was 13, we were all hanging out. We had dinner together, and it was Halloween night. It happened to be a night when my home group met, and we were all hanging out, and Nate was going to go out and trick or treat because Nate was 13 and Benjamin was 10. And the other kids were slightly older, but one of my daughters said to Nate as he was walking out the door, "Just don't get arrested, Nate." I just laughed and went, "Sharisa, why would you say something like that?" You know, listening to a lot of the protests and the interviews and whatever, was actually realizing how many people of color, and especially blacks, black fathers, mothers, have to tell their kids, be careful, be aware, watch out, because you're going to be seen first by the color of your skin. You're going to be treated by the color of your skin. They're going to have beliefs about you because of the color of your skin. Well, it was just the silliest thing in that moment. Sharice just says, "So Nate, don't get arrested." So we go to our home group, and around 9 o'clock, 9:15, I get a call from Nathan's best friend, Johnny. And Johnny calls, says, "Mr. Fee, you need to come home right away." And I said, "Why?" He says, "Because Nate's been arrested." And I just start laughing, and I go, "What do you mean he's been arrested? Ridiculous. Stop trying to play games. I'm in a meeting." And he goes, "No, Mr. Fee, I'm serious. I'm serious. You got to come home. Nate's been arrested." And so Robin and I get in the car. We drive 15, 20 minutes home. And I go over to the police station. And I walk in and try to find out what's going on. Well, I see Johnny, and Johnny tells me, he says, "Mr. Fee, you know, Nate was coming over to my house to go trick-or-treating. And in this particular part from our house to get into this main neighborhood, there was this incredibly long block. And everybody walked through the school grounds of the school that was in the middle of this very long block off of Main Street. And everybody walked through to get to this other neighborhood. And so Johnny says, "Nate was supposed to be coming over, but I've heard from the other kids that he got arrested when he was heading over." And so I go to the police station and I'm asking, "I want to see my son. What's going on?" And they said, "Sir, just have a seat. Just have a seat." So Robin and I are sitting there. Over the next 2 hours, he's 13 years old. Over the next 2 hours, and this one kid after another, they arrested about 8 kids. One kid after another's coming out. And so I stopped them and I go, "Can you help me understand what is going on here? What happened?" They said, "Mr. Fee, we were just being, stupid and silly. We were throwing eggs. We were shaving cream, one another and things and whatnot." And he says, "But we have no idea why Nate's here. He wasn't even there." I'm going, "What?" He says, yeah. Well, eventually, one of the kids came out who was actually in the squad car that Nathan was in. And this guy tells me, he says, yeah, he says, he arrested Nate, he arrested me. I don't even know how Nate got there. I don't know why they arrested Nate. He wasn't doing anything with us. But he said the cop, at one point, Nathan said, why are you arresting me? And the cop turned and said, shut up, kid. I'm done. I'm finished. I don't care what you did or didn't do. I'm arresting you. And one of the kids comes out and tells me this. Well, now I'm telling you, man, I'm starting to fume. And one after another are corroborating this story. And I'm still not seeing Nate. So finally, the arresting officer, who was a lieutenant, he comes out. And so I walk up to him and I said, I want to see my son. And he goes, wait your turn, sir. And he turned and started to walk away from me. Well, I've never had an encounter with a policeman before, so I reached out and I grabbed his shoulder. Yeah, I see some of your guys' reactions. I didn't know any better. I reached out and I grabbed his shoulder, and he turned to look at me and he said, get your hand off of me or you're going to join your son. And I can't believe what came out of my mouth next. I said, don't you dare turn your back on me. When I'm talking to you, you turn around. You do not disrespect me. You owe me an answer. You owe me an explanation. So, okay, I've got hands off, but you better tell me what's going on. And he just looked me back in the eye and said, sir, you better sit down or I'm going to put you in jail too. I said, no. And at this point, my voice, as you can hear even now, I mean, it's escalating. And Robin gets up and grabs a hold of my jacket, and she just pulls me and yanks me out of the lobby. And I'm still just like, rah, 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 rah. And she pulls me out and takes me outside and says, honey, you need to calm down. I said, I won't calm down. This is wrong. Well, finally, I calm down enough. I go back in, I sit down, Nate comes out, and Nate, again, tells the whole story. He says, Dad, they even fingerprinted me. So, I get home, I am incensed. The next day, Nathan comes home from school. He said, Dad, he said, there was like an uprising in our school today, and most of it centered around me. He said some of the kids recognized that they had done things. But he said, they were trying to defend me, to stand up for me, and they were thinking about how they were going to protest and do something and cause more trouble. And I said, I'm telling them, don't. Oh, and here's the deal. So in the last moment, when my son finally comes out and the lieutenant comes out, he hands me this piece of paper and he says, so your son's been charged with trespassing. I go, what? And he says, yeah, there's a sign on the side of the school building that says no trespassing after such and such an hour. I said, you have got to be kidding me. For years and years and years and years, everybody walks through that part of the school ground to get from one side of from Main Street to that neighborhood. Son was trespassing. I had a right to arrest him, and you're going to be in Cambridge Circuit Court on such and such a date. Oh, I was outraged. So the next day, Nate comes home and tells me this, that the kids are all up in arms and that they want to do something. They want to raise a stink and cause trouble. So I got in the car. I drove over to the police station to see the chief. I sat down with the chief and I said, look, first when I introduced myself, he goes, oh, you're the one who was here last night. Obviously, they had talked about me among the other police officers. And I said, yeah, I said, I didn't handle myself too well. I was pretty irate. I felt like I had a right to, and especially when a technicality that he actually believed that it was appropriate for him to put my 13-year-old in jail, and now he has to appear and go to court. But I said, that's beside the point. I'm not here for that. I'm here to say, officer, though, ultimately mistreated him. Witnesses say that he didn't care whether my son was there or not. He was fed up. He was going to arrest somebody, and somebody was going to pay for all the craziness that had been going on, and the eggs had been thrown in his car and whatnot. I said, don't you think it would be a much more valuable thing for you to actually get your officer to come talk to my son and apologize? Even if, okay, so you got him on a technicality, but at least to apologize for what he said and the way he treated him. And the chief said, no way. No way. Besides all that, it'll blow over. I just looked him square in the eyes and said, dude, you are crazy. You don't understand the human brain then. You don't understand how the human mind works. Experiences with high emotion, those get remembered. Those get thought again and again, and they become entrenched in a mind and a heart, beliefs and emotions and attitudes. Realize you let this go unchecked, and you're going to have a whole generation of kids in this town who are going to hate you, think that you are unfair and unjust. He did what was right. He had a right to arrest him, and it'll blow over. Well, I'm telling you, it did not blow over. Over the years, I still heard Nate's friends talk about, remember when, yeah, those damn cops, you know, blah, 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 blah. The point was, it was another time that the Lord was helping me trying to see, and I didn't see that. It helped me see how ignorant I was. Again, that was somewhere around probably 2003. I stopped being the senior pastor of the church in 2005. My friend Chuck moved on to somewhere else. The thing that was really sad to me that I didn't even realize even then that the Lord was trying to address ignorance in a sense of just a blind racism, that what my son experienced, what I experienced with him, what it's like for a person of color, especially Black, browns, Black, especially African Black, which of course there are Blacks and browns from all parts of the globe, you know, Middle Eastern are Black and brown, and Central and South America, some are Black and brown, but it's African Americans, it's African Blacks who in particular are treated horribly and badly, and especially treated like my son Nate was. Didn't even make the connection because in Wakefield, Massachusetts, it was lily white. Not even making the connection that what I experienced is what Black families experience all the time. Their kids go out, they got to train their kids that on the way out the door, maybe they have a sister to go, don't be stupid, don't get arrested. And it actually happened to me. And especially the outrage. Even as the Lord reminded me of this story, he just said, Mark, do you realize that that's my heart? When I said that I'm the original protester, I defend the cause of the fatherless. I defend the oppressed. I set prisoners free. Mark, do you realize the way that you responded on behalf of Nathan and went to the chief priest? Do you realize that that's what I did through my prophets? You realize that the prophets were more often than not actually the voice of God protesting injustice. Help me to see that my experience with my son. He was trying to help me understand my ignorance, help me to understand what's going on with my Black and brown brothers and sisters. That recognizing that even when we're gathered together in church, we see one another, hopefully, as equals, love and respect and treat one another that way. But when they walk out of our fellowship, out of our gathering, whether it's a small group or Sunday morning, their reality, when they go out and do life, they are seen first and foremost by the color of their skin, which then means instead of being treated with respect, care, and love and justice, they are treated in ways that I can't even imagine. And I had one little experience, and to see how outraged I was, I didn't even make the connection. Didn't even make the connection. And that's where the uninvolved part came. Was then I recognized that even though I would see my brothers and sisters of color around me, especially when we were in our family gatherings, and I would love them and treat them as my own family, as my own brother and sister. Every time they walked out into our culture, our lives, extraordinarily different. And what I experienced with my son Nate, just that one night, that one time, and going to court, watching him and those kids have to stand before that judge, a bunch of 13-year-olds. My Black brothers and sisters have to go through this stuff all the time, fear this all the time, to experience injustice when they go for a loan, in their wages, where they get to live, their health care. That's what it means for Black lives to matter, is that, yeah, all lives matter, but right now there is a particular people group who are really taking the brunt of injustice. So finally, in the last couple of days, I've just been weeping and just going, Father, I'm sorry, man. I would think of myself as not being racist, but you've given me these teachable moments to wake me up, to be in Zambia, to walk in that sea of Black and realize that I probably was only being seen by the color of my skin, and made me afraid. When my friend Chuck said, Mark, it was such an ignorant thing to say, to not see the color of my skin. But then especially the experience with Nathan. And I just went nuts as a father. And the Lord says, Mark, how much more is that my heart? How much more is that my outrage? How much more is that my desire to go sit down with the police chief, with those who are in authority and leadership, and say, this is not okay. You need to apologize. You need to make this right. And realizing that eventually what happened is that I just really never got involved. It never went to the next place of being active in it somehow, doing something better. And hearing someone make these two quotes again that I'd heard at different times, you know, that silence gives consent, or even the more difficult one, that all for evil, the only thing, what is it? I've been trying to memorize it better. All that's necessary for evil to be successful, to succeed, is for good people to do nothing. And it just pierced my heart. And I go, Lord, the problem is I forget. I forget. Because this is not the world that I live in. Even the town I live in now, in Danvers, Massachusetts, in the North Shore, there's like maybe 1% of the population is colored. I don't see them. And the Lord reminded me that that's a huge problem, is that so many of us forget because we're not around, we don't see. Even in our own church, the people of color, even in my own church, a couple of Indians who are very, very dark skinned, might even be called Black, but they're not even African Black. So I don't see them, and then I forget when they walk out the door, I think their life is like my life. biggest issue was going, Lord, how do I remember? Because there was a time when one of the most haunting passages for me was the story, the parable of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, right? In the end, when the Lord's going to judge and separate the sheep and the goats. And remember, the criteria for judgment is what they did and didn't do. Well, and what were that? What were those things? The Lord was going to challenge them as, I was hungry, you didn't feed me, or you did feed me. I was thirsty, you did or didn't give me something to drink. I was a wanderer, I was homeless, you did or didn't give me something. I was in prison, I was without health, etc., etc., etc. Well, one day I recognized that that list Jesus was referring to was in Isaiah 58, a chapter where God challenges the people about what a true fast is. I recognize when God was challenging the people, you think one day fasting is a big deal to me? He says, here's a true fast. A true fast, again, is to care for the oppressed, to set the prisoner free, to give the poor wanderer shelter, to feed. And I realized as I was reading through that fast that it was all the same things that Jesus was saying. It's what you did or didn't do to me. And so one of the things the Lord had me do, and here's where I want to challenge you, that because it's even one thing to become informed, but it really has to move us into the next step of being involved, being a part of making a difference. And a lot of times between the being informed and being involved, if we don't have something to help us stay in that process until that transition takes place, we will forget and we won't do something. And so it was because of this fasting where the Lord pointed out this thing about fasting. And the thing that he really helped me about fasting is that all my life, fasting was so that we go spend time, special time with God, focus on God. But what's amazing about that fasting is that he says, don't fast to spend time with me, fast so that you can think about and make a difference and do something for those who are being treated wrongly, unjustly. So what I did then is that Robin and I started taking a day fasts. And we kept it just to a day because by the end of the day and during the day, your stomach starts growling and feeling uncomfortable. And realizing the Lord said, Mark, that's just a teeny reminder of the suffering that people experience when they don't have food, they don't have drink, they don't have shelter, they don't have freedom, they don't have justice, they don't have a place to live, etc., etc. They don't have health. Every time my stomach would growl and I'd feel a little discomfort, he'd say, I want you to remember that there are all kinds of people out there who go without and who are uncomfortable. And as I mentioned, I don't know if you can actually see this very well. But anyway, you'll see it's a list of verses. And what I did, I turned to this page every Friday, the center of my quiet time, to help me remember those who are without and uncomfortable, those who are experiencing injustice. Robin and I pray about, Lord, what difference can we make? What can we do? But what he's challenged me since Sunday and up until this day was that Robin and I have done lots of different things, that we regularly give to widows, that our church is a part of the foster care system, and we do a lot to help and care about foster care. And so there have been things that we've done, but Black Lives Matter, these protests, is that recognizing that the Lord's just done a new work in my soul, and there's going to be somewhere new, or you can see my piece of paper is just crammed with stuff. I'm going to have to turn the page or something. But most importantly is to go, Lord, help me do the next thing. Help me to figure out, how do I get involved in making a difference for the injustice that's going on? How do I join your protest? And one of the last things the Lord helped me see this week too was that, the Apostle Paul, Jew, remember in the Philippians, he says, if anybody had a reason to feel that he was privileged and superior, it was him. And he lists these 7 things about what made him, if he wished to, could see himself as superior to all other Jews, much less Gentiles. But the Lord helped me realize, you remember when Peter, in Galatians chapter 2, when Peter, out of fear of his Jewish brothers and sisters, was ignoring the Gentiles and not spending time with them. Do you realize it wasn't the Jews or the Gentiles that rose up and protested? It was Paul, a fellow Jew, that actually rose up, spoke up, challenged Peter to do the right thing on behalf of Gentile believers. Again, is where the Lord's really challenged me this week, is to go, Mark, more than your black brothers or sisters, it should be your voice, son. As a white Christian, you need to be a part. You need to be leading the way. You need to be my voice, protesting the injustice and getting involved in it somehow, some way. And most of all, I thank God for the experience, Zambia, Chuck, Nathan, and especially Nathan, as I was meditating on that, just to realize, oh God, I pray that you would put that same kind of craziness to rise up in my soul, that I would care about what's happening to my black brothers and sisters the way I cared about Nate, that I would get up and go to the chief of police and plead with him to do something to make things right. All I know is that I live in a lily white community. I live in a church that's primarily white. If I didn't do this 1 week fasting thing, I'm not around people who are hungry. I'm not around people who are homeless. I never see them. Without this 1 day a week fasting to at least keep it in front of me. But now the Lord's just taken it to a whole nother level to go, Mark, I want your involvement to be even more. Not just an occasional gift. So I don't know what that looks like for me right now. And I'm sure, I hope maybe it causes you to think. All I'm sharing with you today is just what the Lord's been doing with me. I'm almost 50. I'm 49 years old, a Christian. I became a Christian at 13. And he's been trying to get my attention and teach me and help me to recognize that he hates injustice. He defends, rises up, cares about, speaks, protests injustice. And I've missed it. I've caught, I've experienced, I've been informed. He's helped me see how ignorant and blind I was, but somehow it just didn't translate from understanding to involvement. He helped me with this fasting thing so that I'm at least a bit more active, and once a week I have to really think and pray and ask that question. But I'm just sharing with you this week, in light of the protest, that God's really, really challenged my heart to go, Mark, there's just a whole nother area that you need to get involved. I don't know what that looks like yet, but PJ, I just want to say, I'm really, really sorry that you and I could have been in church together and not think about the fact that when you and I walked out those doors, your life was radically different than mine. And the things you had to be mindful of, be concerned about, talk to your kids about, the opportunities that you did and didn't have. I am really, really, really sorry. And I just want to say that from the bottom of my heart. And I invite you to check back in and ask me. So, Mark, how's the Lord help move you from understanding to involvement? So anyway, that's my heart, you guys. Thanks for listening.
Hey, PJ, I know you had put some stuff in the chat. Not everybody looks at the chat. Did you want to share any reflection?
I actually do. And you guys just gonna have to trust that I know what I'm talking about because of the color of my skin. I've been in Darien 22 years, and I moved here for a better life for my children, not thinking I moved to a place because it's all white, it's more affluent and blah, blah, blah. No, every parent that I know wants a better life for their children. I grew up in Ardsley in Westchester County. I had a good life. Did we experience racism? Sure, but it didn't define who we were. I've been a Christian since I was 6 years old, and my parents raised us in church and understanding that no matter what happens, we start with God first. We give it to God. And that's a tough lesson when you're growing up and people don't like you because of the color of your skin. But you find, and we found comfort in knowing that, okay, you know what? This is what we were taught, and it's what I teach my children. At the Darien rally or protest the other day when my children spoke, and each one is a different color. My 4 children have a range, and my eldest and myself are the darkest. So, you know, we have experienced life completely different. I thought it important to speak to our community and talk about how awesome our policemen have been. And do you have some bad apples? You have that everywhere. Do you have some bad apples and bad actors in the Black community? Sure. And I spoke because I don't define who I am by the color of my skin. I don't let anybody else do that either. I listen to what God says. God says that I'm his child, that because of the shed blood of Christ, that red blood that washes away all sin of prejudice, of ignorance, of just unfairness and everything, it's been handled. And so starting there is so important in the conversation with my children. Do I worry for their safety sometimes? Absolutely. Am I cautious to tell them, hey, listen, this is what you got to be aware of? Absolutely. But I don't let the hatred of people define how I'm going or supposed to live as a brother in Christ, as a father trying to just raise his children in a godly manner. And sometimes it falls on deaf ears, but it doesn't stop me from doing what I'm supposed to do. I also hear a lot of people apologizing. And you know what? I have mixed emotions on that, because just like I'm not the spokesperson for the entire mixed and Black culture, you guys and gals are not the spokesperson to say sorry for a lot of the people that are white that may have been prejudiced or view me in a different way or treat others differently because of the color of their skin or the privilege that they may think they have or they don't have. I do appreciate a recognition, but I'm going to point us back to God. I'm going to point us back to saying that Christ is the example. And I don't look at Christ and being like, oh, the guy's a white dude, he was a Black guy, he was Middle European, I don't know. He's Christ, and his redemptive blood is what makes all of this possible. His redemptive blood makes it so that I can say, you know what would Jesus do? He would tell me to cast my cares on him. He would tell me to trust in him. He would tell me to get on my knees, pray for those who despitefully use you. He would tell me to rise above, he would tell me that he is in control and that he is going to take care of this. Our world is in a crazy place. And please, please, please don't believe that every time I walk out of the house, I live in fear, because God says, fear not. Yeah, that's not how we're supposed to live. I don't live in fear. Am I cognizant of things that are happening, especially in this culture right now? Absolutely. But it doesn't change who I am in Christ. So I start there. And I encourage you, brothers, to keep that message. It's not black, it's not brown, it's not white, it's not yellow, it's not green, it's red. And that's the shed blood of Christ. So thank you. And I do appreciate it, brothers.